Hi guys, and welcome to my VIP site again. I thought I'd come on quick today and demo for you how easy it is to make one of our favorites here, which is Mongolian beef. If any of you participated in my freezer prep classes previously, you'll know that this was usually on the menu because it's so handy to have in the freezer and just pull out and throw in your crock pot from frozen. Those days you just don't think you're ever going to get organized, and it's a great dinner. So super easy to make. Everything I'm going to demo is going to be easy to make, or I'm not doing it. So the first thing that we're going to do is put the meat in the Ziploc bag. We're going to put a little bit of cornstarch on there so that it's evenly distributed. We're going to make a sauce, dump it in the bag, and that's how easy this recipe is. So you want to grab a large size Ziploc bag. And before you put anything in there, you're going to put Mongolian beef, because you're not going to remember what's in the bag. And then you're going to put low 6 to 7 hours. Because the meat is cut up small, it doesn't take the same length of time it would take in a crock pot for a full roast. So you're going to put the cook time on there and whether it's low or high. So months from now, when you dig this out for that unorganized day, it's all there in front of you. Now I would suggest you use a permanent marker, because if you don't and your hands are wet or any part of this gets wet in the freezer, it's going to smear off and then you're going to be eating mystery meat until it's cooked. So I've got my large Ziploc bag and I've labeled it. Now the Mongolian beef recipe calls for 1.5 to 2 pounds of meat. Depending on how many you're feeding, it's just Nick and I, so I've got 1.5 pounds of meat here. I have cut it up into cube-sized pieces, smallish, whatever. It's your crock pot, you can't mess it up. So I have a 1.5 pounds of meat. Now it calls for either flank steak or I tend to use a blade roast, because both those cuts of meat, when put in a crock pot, fall apart and they become melt in your mouth tender. You can also substitute chicken if you'd rather not have the red meat in your repertoire. Mongolian chicken, there you go. I have cut up 1.5 pounds. If you're feeding a family of hungry people, cut up 2 pounds. Again, this is all going in the crock pot. So there is a recipe for it for those people that would prefer to have something a guideline to go by the first time they make it. But if you have an extra handful of this or that in the crock pot, it's not going to make a difference. This recipe makes a lot of sauce, which makes it great for scooping out and putting over rice. So don't worry about being exact. Here is 1.5 pounds of blade roast. Now, if people have not ever used a blade roast before, it's one of those chuck roast or, those roasts that your mom used to cook in the oven that just fell apart. Never slices nicely. It's for a family meal, but it just falls apart very, very tender. We're having a roast tomorrow, and I had trouble finding a blade roast. But they did have them at the country butcher and it was huge. So I just chopped off 1.5 pounds of it. I'm cutting it up to demo the Mongolian beef. We had this Mongolian beef recipe this week, so it's time to restock the freezer because I just love having it on hand. So I'm digressing. Blade roast. Toss it in the Ziploc bag. Like I said, you can cut it in chunks. If you were doing chicken, you would also cut it into chunks. If you got a flank steak, just cut it in stir fry like strips. Doesn't matter, whatever you want. To this, I am going to add 1/4 cup of cornstarch. The cornstarch is going to get evenly distributed on the meat. While it's in the crock pot with the liquid of the sauce, it thickens the sauce. So when you're all done, there's no messing around in the last half hour, add this. No, it's ready. So, 1/4 cup of cornstarch, and you're going to want to seal the bag tightly, just so that the cornstarch doesn't barf all over your kitchen. So you've got your bag sealed, and now you're going to shake it up. All you're doing is evenly distributing the cornstarch so that it sticks to the meat, so that when it goes in the crock pot, you're not going to get a lumpy gravy. Okay? Done. So now we're going to put some vegetables into the bag. Okay. Recipe calls for 3 green onions. You can use 3, you can use 6, doesn't really matter, depends on your family preferences. And again, it's going in a crock pot, so it doesn't have to be chopped really tiny, excuse me. I was so sure I had everything out that I needed. This is one of EPICURE's Prep Pro knives. You see me repeatedly talking about the same items in EPICURE every time I do one of these videos. Good indication, I use them all the time. So, just chop your green onions into any size you like. They will keep their shape in the crock pot. They won't turn to mush. If your family isn't all a fan of the onions, cut them a little bigger. They can see them coming and they can avoid it if they wish. Those just go into the bag. Right into the bag with the meat. Okay? The recipe also calls for a half a cup of shredded carrots. Am I going to shred carrots? No, I am not. I'm going to use our mandolin slicer. These things are super slick. They have 4 blades that pop right out. There's a little button on the bottom. 2 of them are for flat slicing, different depths, and 2 of them are for making your julienne, different size blades, whether you want it fine or not. This just hooks into a hole on the end, blade snaps in. Super sharp, be very careful. This will slice the carrots very, very thin. They will keep their form in the crock pot, but you're not sitting there grating your fingernails into your carrots. These blades are really, really sharp. It calls for half a cup. Again, not gonna matter how much you have. I had this carrot in the crisper, so I'm just gonna slice those up pretty quickly. Oops, slipping and sliding today. Not sure what I've got going on here. So after we've got the carrots sliced up, and you could chop small cubes, really small cubes, because you're not going to have the meat in the crock pot for the full 8 to 10 hours. You do want it small enough that, that the carrots will cook in that time. So you've got half a cup of carrots. You're going to dump those in the bag with the meat. Again, always using my cutting boards. Didn't think of it this time, but you know, whenever you're putting something in a small opening like the Ziploc bag, this thing comes in handy too. So in the bag, we have the meat, the carrots, the green onions, some cornstarch just to thicken the gravy while it's in the crock pot. Now it is time to make the sauce. Again, really easy. I'm using my 4-cup prep bowl. Love it. It's got a lid if you want to use it to take a salad to a picnic, whatever. You've got sauce, gravy left over in the fridge. It's got a nice snap-on silicone lid so your liquids are safe. It's 4 cups. So there's enough room in there that I can whisk around. So to make the sauce, you're going to put in 1.5 tablespoons of our roasted garlic aioli. I like the roasted garlic flavor. It's a little smoother, if that's a way of describing garlic, than regular garlic powder. It doesn't leave the same kind of tangy aftertaste. So we're going to use 1.5 tablespoons of the roasted garlic aioli. You can substitute just regular old garlic powder, and I would only use 1 tablespoon of that if I was substituting. We have our 4-in-1 spoon, which is the tablespoon and the teaspoon. You flip it over. There's 1/2 teaspoon and a line for 1/4 teaspoon. So these are great. They fit inside our jars. So we're going to do 1.5 tablespoons of the garlic aioli-ish. Again, garlic, hello. So it's called roasted garlic aioli if you're looking on the site. We're also going to use 1/2 teaspoon of the dried minced garlic. Super great, tastes just like fresh. So I'm going to turn the tablespoon over to use the 1/2 teaspoon size and throw in the roasted garlic. That's the minced garlic. The next we're going to do is the 2 tablespoons of oil. I'm going to use olive oil. You can use whatever you want, whatever you have on hand. A little touch of sesame oil is also good in here. And it's tablespoons. So I already used my tablespoon for the dry measure first because, you know, thinking. So this calls for 2 tablespoons of oil. Don't be panicking. I will post the recipe when I post this video. so that it's handy for you. 2 tablespoons of oil. It calls for 3/4 cup of soy sauce. This is our individual 1 cup prep bowl with a lid, similar to this larger one I was showing you. They come in a set of 4, really handy for leftovers in the fridge. And they have the markings 1/4 cup, 1/2 cup, 3/4 cup, and the full measure would be a cup. Anyway, 3/4 cup of soy sauce, 3/4 cup of brown sugar. Excuse me for just a minute. And also 3/4 cup of water. That's it. That's it. That's how easy it is to make Mongolian beef. So I'm just stirring this up a little bit to break up the brown sugar. I am going to dump this sauce. Oh, missed a little bit of soya. I'm going to dump this sauce into the bag that has the meat and the vegetables in it. And it's ready for the freezer. So you just dump that in there. Make sure you get all the goodness out. I have the 3-in-1 spatula here for a nice grippy swipe of the bowl to get all the goodness out of there. Once again, we're going to seal up the bag tightly. Make sure it's sealed. And you're just going to mix that in a little bit. You're done. You are done. So we're going to put this in the freezer for some rainy day, snowy day like we had yesterday. And you're just going to take the air out of the bag before you put it in the freezer. Okay? And I will caution you, when it comes time to cook this, you're going to cook it, like I said, in your crock pot from 6 to 7 hours on low. You're going to put it in your crock pot 100% frozen, which is the biggest selling point for me as far as not being organized. So don't freeze it flat, all flattened out in your Ziploc if that all flattened out shape doesn't fit in your crock pot, okay? So I will tell you how I know these things. So I freeze mine like this. It's an oval, sits like that. I freeze it like that, and then come the day I want to serve it, I just run the bag under hot water just for a second to loosen the frozen meat and juice from the Ziploc. I take it out of the Ziploc, dump it in the crock pot, put the lid on it, and you're done. At the end of the meal, grab a couple bags of those 2-minute rice. Bob's your uncle. You're all done. It's so easy. I was talking about blade roast earlier. Because it falls apart, melts in your mouth, you can use blade roast in your crock pot so easily. One of our favorite things, what I'm doing tomorrow, just throwing a blade roast into my crock pot. I will put on top of that 2 cans of cream of mushroom soup. Telling you again, I hate cooked mushroom flavor. It's not my thing. I know it's quite popular. And for whatever reason, the juice from the roast and the cream of mushroom soup on top of it turns into beef gravy. You can't taste the mushrooms, and it is wonderful. That's it. Throw it on low for 8 hours. You're done. Roast beef and gravy. The other thing we like to do is take a blade roast, slap it in your crock pot. You take a 1/2 cup of the barbecue sauce of your choice. We happen to use Bullseye, but whatever you want. 1/2 cup of barbecue sauce and a package of taco mix. I would highly suggest EPICURE taco mix, but you know, whatever. Mix the barbecue sauce and the taco mix on, spread it over your roast. Again, throw it on low for 8 hours. Pull it out after 8 hours and shred it up with forks. Put it back in the sauce. And it's like pulled beef on a bun. It is really good. So anyway, thank you for sharing this with me. Please keep an eye on my VIP site. I will be doing more demos from time to time. Thanks again.